Hey guys, this is Danny Boys. This is going to be a continuation of just my few videos that are going to show the Witch Doctor's abilities and their runes, just kind of a primer. Apologies that it's been a while, but I've been doing other stuff. So, to start, Grasp of the Dead. Grasp of the Dead is a snare. 60% snare base, does 20% weapon damage as physical over 8 seconds. Actually, for 8 seconds, not over 8 seconds. Key difference. 20% weapon damage per second for 8 seconds. So, the base ability. Circle. With zombie arms. Again. So, as far as runes go, first off, we have Unbreakable Grasp, one of the best runes for the ability. It turns it into an 80% snare. Very potent. It's now kind of blue and purple. With ghosts in it, apparently. Next up, we've got Groping Eels. Groping Eels does not improve the snare, but instead improves the damage component. To 34% weapon damage per second. Which is an improvement, but I think if you're going to use Grasp of the Dead, you'd be better off using Unbreakable Grasp. Just for the snare component, because there are better damaging abilities in general. The damage is more of a perk for this ability than something you really want to rely on, generally speaking. But Groping Eels can make it more of a potent damage ability. Death is Life just makes it so that enemies that die in the area have a chance to drop health globes. This can be useful with abilities like Gruesome Feast. Gruesome Feast makes it so that you regenerate mana when you pick up health globes, and more importantly, you get 10% intelligence for 10 seconds. Which can stack up to 5 times, which 50% intelligence can be very, very significant. So there's a synergy there. Another ability that can give you health globes, if you wanted to try to make a build out of Gruesome Feast, would be Zombie Dogs. Final Gift, whenever they die. So summon a lot of zombie dogs, kill them a lot. Say, use other abilities to get them going, like De-Evolution from Mass Confusion, or Boogeyman from Big Bad Voodoo to get more zombie dogs and have them die constantly and give you health globes constantly. So you can try to make a build out of Gruesome Feast, but definitely not the easiest thing to do. Or group with Barbarian. Barbarians have different runes that make health globes drop more often as well. Something to consider. Next up, Desperate Grasp. Desperate Grasp reduces the cooldown of the grasp to 6 seconds. Oh, actually, I don't think I ever actually showed Death is Life. No more hands, and instead we have kind of a green poison cloud. And some more. Next, Desperate Grasp, as I said, it reduces the cooldown to 6 seconds. Personally, I think you're better off with Unbreakable Grasp than reducing the cooldown to 6 seconds, unless you're relying on the ability more for damage than the snare. The 20% difference on the snare really does make a noticeable difference in the ability and its control potency. Personally, I'd rather have a stronger snare than just using it more often. Desperate Grasp makes, I think, these little beams appear and the hands flail about more quickly. It's kind of a subtle change. Might be a slightly different sound effect too, I don't know. That's that. And then finally, Rain of Corpses, and I will demonstrate Rain of Corpses in actual combat because it fundamentally changes the ability. Corpses fall from the sky, dealing 80% weapon damage as physical over 8 seconds to nearby enemies. Now, it doesn't do 80% weapon damage as physical over 8 seconds, the corpses fall over 8 seconds. The individual corpses do 80% of weapon damage. So it's a big improvement over the base damage of the ability, kind of, sort of, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. Let me go find some enemies. So here we go. Some enemies. We cast it, and corpses fall from the sky. And each corpse also does have an area of effect. As well, notice that one corpse is hitting everybody. And the base ability does still do damage as well. So the corpses are purely in addition to the base ability. They rain from the sky. They'll actually continue raining, I believe, after you die as well. No, I guess not. But yeah, the corpses, I don't actually have any other abilities on my bars right now, so there wasn't really much I could do beyond potting. The corpses will rain from the sky. They will do damage in addition to the snare component in the circle, and in addition to the damage component in the circle. It's just supplementary damage. Also, the corpses are not limited to the circle. The corpses, they will actually hit enemies throughout your entire screen. Basically, throughout just everything that you can see, they will strike enemies. They don't have to be within the circle, but they do have to still be within the circle in order to continue to snare enemies and to do damage for just the base ability. The 20% weapon damage is physical for 8 seconds. So fundamentally changes it. It can be a nice bit of supplementary damage, but still, if you're using this ability, there are better abilities for damage. I personally think it's incredibly flavorful, Rain of Corpses, and really fun. But I would still say if you're going to use Grasp of the Dead, you should probably be using Unbreakable Grasp, or maybe Death is Life if you're trying to make a gruesome feast build. But other than that, can't really recommend it. As fun as Rain of Corpses is. That's that. Moving on. Next we have Fire Bats. Fire Bats is just, it's an Inferno ability. 150% weapon damage per second as fire. So think the Sorceress's Inferno in Diablo 2. That's basically what it is.
Need more mana.
Me put this on my bars just so I have more mana to work with. So, just kind of your standard Inferno. Next, we have Dire Bats. Dire Bats is one of the stronger abilities for the Witch Doctor. Fundamentally changes the ability. Rather than summoning an Inferno, you summon one big bat that travels up to 40 yards, and it hits for 220% weapon damage. And it hits every enemy in its path for that much weapon damage. So, it's just one big bat, kind of oscillates from left to right.
I do not have enough mana.
That's basically all there is to it. Good for large groups, really potent. A lot of Witch Doctors use Dire Bats along with Splinters, Poison Dart. Some of the most damage you can really do. But anyway, next is Vampire Bats. Vampire Bats just gives it some lifesteal, but you're so close that it's so dangerous that can't really recommend it. Makes it kind of a pink reddish color.
Need more mana.
Still a standard Inferno. It makes it easier to survive if you want to use it as a base Inferno ability, but it's so mana hungry and you're so close to enemies that I can't recommend this barring leveling up. Certainly not an Inferno, or even hell beyond maybe Act 1, even in Act 1, risky. Next is Plague Bats. Plague Bats just gives it kind of a ramp-up effect to a maximum of 225% as poison. But it's still your basic Inferno. It's now green.
I do not have enough mana.
And that's basically it. So, next is Hungry Bats. Hungry Bats summon bats that seek out enemies for 280% weapon damage. Think of it kind of as heat-seeking missiles. It's no longer an Inferno. You're sending out bats that seek out enemies, and each bat does 280% weapon damage as fire. Definitely one of the more potent abilities the Witch Doctor has. Get mana back. So, heat-seeking missiles, essentially. And then finally, Cloud of Bats. Cloud of Bats, again, totally changes the ability. You, instead of channeling the Inferno kind of effect, you have a PBAOE effect, a point-blank area of effect attack that does 195% weapon damage plus an additional 10% every second up to a max of 50%. So you're looking at 245% total weapon damage with Cloud of Bats. Unfortunately, Cloud of Bats is incredibly dangerous to use because it is a PBAOE. It does tick very quickly, it does a lot of damage, but you have to be so close to enemies, just like the Inferno. You have to be even closer, actually. Its range is even closer. It's just a PBAOE effect instead of a cone. You can definitely do a lot of damage with it, but really dangerous. Can't really recommend it. Next up is Haunt. Haunt is a dot. It's a damage over time effect. It does 575% weapon damage, which is quite potent, but it's over 12 seconds. So here we are. You cast a haunt, it seeks out a target, and if the target dies, it will haunt another enemy. So, and you can have multiple enemies affected with the haunt at any given time. So as you see, it's just doing damage to those several targets.
Heal me!
You cannot stack multiple haunts on an individual target, though. So he's about to die, and it flies over to that target. And it's doing arcane damage. That's what the purple stuff is. He dies, but this next zombie was out of range, so it didn't actually affect him. That's basically it. That's the base haunt ability. Quite powerful. Next up, we have Consuming Spirit. Consuming Spirit is the exact same thing. It just returns life per second, and it's going to be red now. So you send out a red projectile. That's really all there is to it as far as that goes. Resentful Spirit summons a spirit that, instead of lasting for 12 seconds doing 575% weapon damage, you're doing 288% weapon damage over 2. Still the same ability, it's just over 2 seconds doing much more damage in that 2 seconds. Just less damage overall. Cast it again. So you can see how much quicker I can kill an opponent with that version. Next up, we have Lingering Spirit. Lingering Spirit just makes it so that when there are no targets left, the spirit will linger for 10 seconds looking for a new enemy, and by linger, basically what it'll do is it'll just kind of hop onto you. So I can cast it with no enemies nearby, and it will hop onto me, and when I find an enemy, it will attack them. And this will last for 10 seconds. And you can have multiple spirits on top of you. I can cast 3. All 3 of those will linger on top of me, and if I find enemies, all 3 of them will seek targets. So you can kind of just pre-dot and get dots on yourself, and then run into some enemies and jump to enemies. But really, it's a quality of life improvement over everything else. Grasping Spirit just turns it into a slow. It gives it a 30% chance to slow. Can't really recommend it. You have far better slows, and this is a really, really mana-intensive slow. I suppose, though, 30% is 30%, and you could have it on multiple targets, and just, even against your main target, slowing them by 30% can be helpful if you're kiting. Has its uses, but I think there are better choices. Finally, Draining Spirit. Draining Spirit makes it return 10.2 mana per second, so it makes it into a mana return ability. However, if you'll note, it costs 98 mana to begin with. So 10.2 times 12 is 122.4 minus 98. And you only have a net gain of 24.4 mana. So that's not much mana. That's really not helping you. That's more just making the ability free for all intents and purposes with just a little bit of positive mana return. However, I highly recommend that if you're going to use this as a mana return ability, to go for Rush of Essence, which also makes the ability return 30% of their mana cost over 10 seconds. So 30% of Haunt is 98, so you just figure out what 30% is. It's 29.4. Add that together with the mana we save from Draining Spirit, and you're looking at a net gain of 53.8 mana per target. So basically, it's free, and you're getting back 53.8 mana per target, which can certainly add up, but you can only cast it once on a boss. You're only getting 53.8 mana on a boss, on an individual target, on a unique. So as a standalone ability to rely on to give you back mana against single targets, not great. It's free, and it gives you back a little bit of mana, but 53.8 every 12 seconds. It's not going to be enough for you to rely on against individual targets. It's really only for making multi-dotting much cheaper and more efficient. But against one target, since you can only have one Haunt up at a time, not really helpful. Much better off with Spine Dart or Poison Dart or Widowmaker Corpse Spiders against individual targets. So that is Haunt. Next up, we have Locust Swarm. Locust Swarm is 360% weapon damage as poison over 8 seconds, and the Locust will jump to additional nearby enemies. So to quickly demonstrate this, it's a very narrow, short range, and then they all jump to additional targets, and they will jump to every single target. They won't, like, jump back and forth, though. Very short range. You do have to be this close. You're looking at maybe 10 yards tops, maybe 12, to get in range to hit enemies. And again, you can't stack this on a target multiple times. You can use it once, and that's it. Kind of dangerous to use an Inferno because you have to be so close. But it does do a lot of damage. It is also very, very expensive. 196 mana per cast. Pestilence just makes it so that it has a 100% chance to jump to 2 additional targets rather than 1. And it slightly changes the color of the ability.
Need more mana.
Devouring Swarm allows you to gain 37 mana for every enemy affected by the Swarm. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about Devouring Swarm. People will ask, why don't you use Devouring Swarm as a means of getting back mana? Because Devouring Swarm does not give you 37 mana per second to every enemy affected. It just gives you 37 mana once when the ability swaps targets. So considering that this ability costs 196 mana to begin with, 196 mana divided by 37 is 5. So you're looking at, to just make the ability break even, you need 5 targets. Once you're beyond that, you're gaining positive mana return. So say you had 10 targets, you would have 37 times 5, which would give you 185 mana back, which is not even enough to cast another Devouring Swarm in that gain against 10 targets. I mean, you can get mana back with it for sure, but really all Devouring Swarm is doing is making the ability free and giving you a net gain so that your next one, you'll be able to cast another Devouring Swarm. But it's not something that you can spam to return mana, and it's totally useless for returning mana against individual targets. So against a boss, against a unique when his minions are dead, even against champion packs, because there's so few of them, there's only 3 to 4, not really useful against those. It just makes it, against a champion pack, break even, against a boss or a unique whose minions are dead, it's pointless because you're just getting 37 mana back, which is nowhere near enough to actually cast the ability again, or really enough return to cast other abilities as well. Again, you're much better off with Spine Dart or Widowmaker Corpse Spiders for something to spam against individual targets. So, to demonstrate it, if you look at my mana bubble, you'll notice that it only goes up and bursts just when the Devouring Swarm seeks out a new target. It'll also go up naturally, that's because I have natural mana regen. So again, it goes up each time it switches to a new target. And if I cast it on one enemy like that jumper thing, it didn't go up at all. I live. Oh, not for long. So that's that. Next up is Cloud of Insects. Cloud of Insects just increases the duration to 10 seconds and adds 2 more ticks to the ability. You're looking at 450% weapon damage over 10 seconds versus 360% weapon damage over 8 seconds. So you are gaining, it's lasting longer, and you are also gaining net damage. It's not just making it do 360% weapon damage over 10 seconds. And here is what Cloud of Insects actually looks like. Actually looks a lot like Devouring Swarm. Kind of a teal, I guess. Anyway, next is Diseased Swarm. Diseased Swarm, when you kill an enemy, they leave behind an incredibly small cloud of locusts that does 25% weapon damage as poison, and it lasts 3 seconds. So you're looking at 75% weapon damage over 3 seconds when you kill an opponent. Incredibly small radius, though, so good luck actually getting enemies to stand in the cloud. So here we go. It jumps. Now I wait for them to die. Wait for it, and there we go. You can see these little tiny clouds, little microscopically small clouds that maybe have a 4-yard radius, if that. That's what it leaves behind. So, smaller than even the clouds that a Poison Hydra for a wizard leaves behind. Incredibly small. Can't recommend it. It's so small that you're just not going to get enemies to stand at it. Maybe with Grasp of the Dead, but even then, you have such a small window to take advantage of it because it only lasts for 3 seconds. I just can't recommend it. Finally, we have Locust Swarm, which makes the attack do 468%, or rather, Searing Locusts, which makes the attack do 468% weapon damage as fire over 8 seconds. A lot more damage, and over the same duration. Cloud of Insects is 450% over 10 seconds. This is 468% over 8 seconds, so a lot more damage. Unfortunately, you're now doing fire damage. So because you're doing fire damage, if you were using bad medicine to make enemies do 20% reduced damage for 3 seconds, which is really substantial, by the way. 20% essential damage reduction. Whenever they're infected by base Locust Swarm or any of the other poison equivalents, you have 20% damage reduction. If you spec into Searing Locusts, you don't have that anymore, so you can't use bad medicine. So it's really up to you. A lot more damage versus survivability. Just kind of unfortunate because Locust is one of the best ways of applying poison to enemies over longer periods of time to give you that damage reduction. But that's basically it. It just does more damage, and it's now red, and it's doing fire damage. Really substantial, a lot of damage. Good ability. And that is Locust Swarm. That's it. So these were the secondary abilities for the Witch Doctor. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. Please like the video if you thought it was helpful. Please, some of you like to see more Diablo 3 stuff, and leave comments and feedback. Feel free to ask questions, and I'll answer them. And have a good one.